Hey, welcome back to MCReviews. Today we're going to be looking at the first 5 tracks of Monstercat 003 Momentum. These are Shivers featuring Metzen by Matduke, Limitless by Project 46, Belgium by Eminence and Alex Faraway, Android by Obsidia, and Top of the World by Stephen Walking. The artists who joined the family on 003 were Hellberg, who is basically Monstercat's main generic houseman, Mr. Fiji who's potentially the most inventive artist on the label, up there with the likes of Karma Fields and Varian. Speaking of whom, one of my all-time favourite musicians, Varian, formerly known as Halo Nova, joins the family here too. But let's get into the first track of Momentum, Shivers by Matduke. So here today we have Matduke's second hard dance track on the label. And as I said a couple episodes ago, I really do quite like his last track, which was known as Rock the House. It really does do a good job of getting me pumped up, which is I guess what hard dance is meant to do, but has, at least for me, never succeeded in. And for that I commend Matduke, but in all honesty, here he does a much worse job of it. That is probably because it's not just hard dance, but potentially the worst of all the subgenres, happy hardcore. I can kind of see the appeal to happy hardcore in a way. It does do a kind of good job of getting you pumped while also bringing the mood up. But for me, the mix of any hardstyle beat or pacing with the overly happy, almost ecstatic sounding melodies are just sort of a perfect concoction of horror, to me at least. I honestly just find the melodies in so many of these happy hardcore songs so annoying, and they're just so happy. I know it's weird, but it almost seems patronizing to me, and I can't quite tell you why. But without further ado, let's get into the nitty gritty of Shivers. The track starts with a pretty damn annoying high-pitched synth thing, which soon drops out with some pretty generic backing pads which seem to be trying really hard to sound emotional. But the biggest issue with this part is on top of the backing pad, there are some female vocals that come in from Metzen, and to be honest, in this track she really just sounds pretty bored to me. She sounds very disinterested, and the track just feels as tame and standard as you can get when it comes to the vocals. You start to hear the main drop melody start leaking into the song. It is soon added towards the build-up and the vocals soon fade out. Speaking of the build-up, it's actually pretty inventive here, I'd say. I haven't really heard many build-ups like this one. I would describe it as being almost jerky in the way it sounds. There are no drums, and then suddenly there's really fast drums, and then there's no drums again, and then suddenly there's really, really fast ones, and then it drops. And I feel like the way this build-up was done was pretty cool in my opinion. So that melody I mentioned earlier that came in that was from the drop, here in the drop, it's pretty much the most of all that happens when it comes to the melody. It's a very conventional, happy hardcore, high-pitched, somewhat dramatic sounding, massively ravey sound that overall to me just I find really predictable and generic and bad. The only other notable feature of this drop for now is the drums, which are just your generic hard dance drums. Thankfully it's not the dong 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 ones that we heard in songs like Obsession, but it's really not much better. It's just your generic kick 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 hard dance thing. The drop is about as fast as you'd expect this kind of song. Expect would be a key word when I think about the song, because it seems like a lot of it you can just, or at least a lot of the melodies in the drops, you can just expect what's going to happen. It's very predictable. And I know some people like their songs to be predictable. For some reason I really don't understand that, but I can't see that as a positive at all. One cool thing that does happen in this drop, basically the entire drop just gets put on a really fast saw for maybe half a second, and the whole song kind of glitches out for a second, and that is cool in the drop. And another little cool thing in the drop which happens is as the longer it goes on, the louder and louder this backing melody becomes, which the sound effect almost reminds me of the sound of like a laser, and as the drop goes on it gets louder and louder and faster until it's pretty much at the forefront and it's pretty much taken over the drop. And to me I find that quite a cool addition. But nonetheless, it can't save the drop from the annoying and repetitive main melody, as well as the beat that I really have heard so many times in so many bad songs. So a drop comes to an end with the song being stripped of pretty much all the happy hardcore melody from the drop, and Metzen's vocals come back in. You know, they're bad as ever, but fortunately the song does keep those cool sort of laser sound effects melody, but less fortunately it also keeps that hardstyle beat into this breakdown type part between the next drops. But then out of nowhere, as if an angel from the land of kinda decent dubstep has come down to earth, the song literally out of nowhere just turns into dubstep for a little while. The vocals are stripped and the beat is completely changed to a genuinely good dubstep beat, the kind that actually has a step in it. And so that beat is introduced, and along with a pretty damn cool growly bass. And this bit, it's really cool. It's about 20 seconds of pretty much just dubstep, which I just didn't see coming out of anywhere. And it's really cool, and it's probably the only part of the track that I genuinely like. Soon though, all the good stuff is made pretty much less good as the hardstyle beat is added back in and takes out the good beat, and the laser melody I was talking about starts building up in pitch alongside the speed of the beat, and it sort of just forms another generic build-up. And when you would be expecting the second drop to come right after this generic sounding build-up, the song kind of goes outside the box a little bit by dropping into another breakdown, or a vocal section, I guess you could say. I like that. It's quite unexpected. You really do think it's going to go into a second drop, but it's sort of a fake out drop. It just drops into vocals. Not vocals, but it drops into a calmer breakdown, getting ready for the next proper drop sort of part. And it really did put a big grin on my face when I heard the dubstep beat come back in this part. It dropped in from the fake out build up, and when it dropped, the first things I heard were that awesome beat and the backing pads from way back in the intro. The vocals are soon reintroduced, and you know, they're bad as ever, but they don't last too long as it soon goes into another pretty generic build-up. This time, it's one of those build-ups where the vocal chop is taken from the main chorus line and repeated with a rise in pitch alongside the beat and the melody, so again, just generic, not that incredible. And then we get the second drop, which in all honesty starts off really cool, as almost the only thing you can hear is the beat and the vocal chop, which again was taken from the chorus and just repeating the word fear. And this part is pretty cool. It has a very nice, clean, minimal sound, which is pretty interesting to hear in a genre such as hard dance, which is completely focused on having lots of sounds happening at once to get people hyped in those sort of rave-style scenarios. But again, whatever goes up must come down, and the happy hardcore melody is reintroduced, and from there on the drop is basically just repeated again. The first drop is repeated again, and the track wrapping up with all the melodies being stripped and the beat fading away. So yeah, I think you know what I'm gonna say now, and I've said it before and I'm gonna say it again. I still just really don't get hardstyle. Even the very best the genre has to offer really doesn't get past even like a mediocre from me most of the time. And of course there are exceptions, but it's just my personal preference. Happy hardcore is sort of like the opposite of the kind of music I like, and it's just a genre I really dislike. And I don't feel like this song is quite bad enough to like say I hate it, but it's certainly really bad to me, and I honestly can't tell if that's my bias against the genre or if it's actually a bad song. It's probably a mix between the both. Not quite the whole song's bad, but the drops, the happy hardcore bits. Fortunately though, the song does have quite a bit of merit hiding away behind all that terrible happy hardcore. And there are 5 main things in this song that I like. 1 being the first build-up was pretty cool and inventive. 2 being the lasers melody in both drops. 3 being the dubstep beat in both breakdowns. 4 being the growly bass that initially accompanies the dubstep beat. And 5 being the minimal start to the second drop. And one thing that you'll notice about all 5 of these things I listed is they're all very unconventional things to find in a happy hardcore song. I really do think that is why this song is really quite inventive to me and reaches out of its genre both in mood and sound, and that's why I don't think this is just a plain bad song. And for that reason I'm going to be giving Shivers by Matduke a 4 out of 10. And I'm happy to say this song is really good at times. I never enjoy giving a song a really low score unless of course it's a Neelio song. I always want a track to at least have some promise and some interesting or unique part, and this track certainly has that. So, for today's second track, we have Limitless by Project 46. And this track is the title track of Monstercat's first ever EP, the abysmal Limitless EP, which Pete did a full review on if you're more interested in it. And as I said in my last review of a Project 46 track, this artist starts really, really, really bad on the label. And this song shows that perfectly. This song is just so bad. I'm not sure if it's worse than Dreaming, which was their previous track, but it's certainly just as bad. This is just another generic house song like we've all heard before, but for some reason this song feels that it has the right to be 7 minutes long. It's about 3.5 minutes longer than this track has any right to be. It's just so long, so drawn out, it's just terrible. But let's get into it. And I doubt this will take too long, as this track has such little to talk about in it. So similarly to Dreaming, it starts off with just a beat. It's a pretty standard house beat. After a little while, a vocal chop comes in and accompanies a backing pad, which sounds quite like strings, and that sort of comes in and adds a little bit of backing to the beat, but there's still very little going on. It's not that long before you start to hear the main lead of the song come in. The main melody that is basically all that happens for the rest of the song is pretty much just this melody. It's about as generic a house melody as you can get. It's predictable, it's slow, it's uninspired, and it's unoriginal. It definitely has that house party rave feel, and it's just so not my thing, and I just really hate this melody. The song starts building up as the melody starts getting a little louder. It starts to get a distorted backing to it, which adds to that clubby, party, generic house feel, just makes it worse. And then it drops, and like with Dreaming, the drop it's just pitiful. The melody, it doesn't change at all. The backing pad and vocal chop are removed, and the beat becomes just more like a crash that hits every so often. And it's the same beat that you hear in every house song, the same melody you hear in every house song, and that's basically all there is, and it's just terrible. When the drop happens, it just feels so insignificant, because the only major part of the song, the melody, it hasn't changed at all, and the drop just continues feeling insignificant as it goes along. Pretty much nothing changes for like the 1.5 minutes that this drop goes on for. It has the same melody, has the same beat the whole way through. The only change is a very minor backing pad, which is introduced later in the drop, which does improve it. It adds a little bit of a dramatic feel, but again, really nowhere near enough changes. It's just so insignificant, and the drop just feels like nothing. It's just nothing happens. It's so repetitive. It's so unoriginal. It's so uninspired. The drop finishes and goes into a breakdown between the two drops, where the main lead is given a bit of a almost 8-bit retro house feel. It keeps a crappy house beat and eventually turns just back into the exact same melody that we've been hearing all throughout the song. And it does the exact same build up, where the melody gets a little more distorted, gets that party backing, and it's just ugh. And then the second drop comes around, and it is the exact same as the first one. It's just terrible. Again, next to nothing changes, and the drop goes on repeating this one melody, and very minor backing changes, and no main melody changes. It goes straight out of the second drop into the third build-up, which is thankfully a little bit different to the first and second build-ups, but it's still just a very generic build-up. It's just one of those ones where it gets faster and higher as it goes along. It has the white noise in the background build-up, and it's generic as all hell. The third drop comes along, and for quite a while, for the first half of it at least, it is again identical to the first and second drops. Thankfully, about a minute in, it does change, with the melody becoming more stilted and sudden, I guess you could sound. It still is on the same chord progression, but I guess the melody comes a bit faster, and it does sound a bit different, but it's not that much of a change. One of the worst parts about this song is the ending, and it comes to an end with a minute. The ending is a minute long. And it has at least 45 seconds, of which it just spends with the same beat. Just the beat happening for 45 seconds with practically nothing else happening. And that's how it ends. It's just beat for 45 seconds to a minute. Oh, that ending is terrible, but the entire song is generic, it's uninspired, it's just bad. This song might have been better than Dreaming because there are no generic vocals, and the melody in the drop is a little bit better, and it has the backing, which is okay, but the fact is this song is 7 minutes long, and that's unforgivable for this song to be this long when that little happens in it. Basically having 3 identical drops doesn't help either. It's just terrible when all three of these drops are as generic, as basic, and as unoriginal as these ones are. This song, honestly, it's just terrible, and it gets a 2 out of 10 from me. It would be a 1 if it wasn't okay for the, at times, okay dramatic backing pads in the drops. Yeah, I know I didn't go into that great detail with the analysis of the song, but to be honest, I just wanted to get it over with, because I don't want to talk about this song, I'm really sick of it, and there wasn't that much to talk about. And if you want to know more about this awful song for some reason, go watch Pete's review, but right now, I'm just happy to never have to listen to it again. So, now for the third track of the day, Belgium by Eminence and Alex Faraway. I've already explained how I feel about Eminence as an artist. Their last song, Tampopo, was one of my highlights of the last album, but I know as artists they sort of go up and down in quality in my opinion, so I'm not entirely sure whether I'm gonna like Belgium or not. As for Alex Faraway, I don't know him very well. I know that generally he makes quite clubby house and trance. Some of it okay, some of it bad, but I'm not a massive fan of that style. And so from the offset, I don't really know what to expect, but it is a trance track, which is good, so let's get into it. So the track starts like so many other trance and house tracks with a beat and white noise, and that's pretty much it. The beat is very okay and follows a very linear cycle. It reminds me a little bit of a hardstyle beat in the way that this is one of those trance tracks which does at times feel a little hardstyle. Like, it's not the dong 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 type of hardstyle, but it's still kind of present, and that's okay. So this is basically just a beat and white noise which goes on for about 30 seconds until a clap beat is added on top of that. And it is at around about this point that things actually start to happen in the song. A very short, bassy and almost bouncy type of melody is added, and by that I don't mean bounce as in the genre, just as in like it's the sort of sound it gives me. Some white noise and other backing pads are added on top of that. A quite fast and spacey synth type melody is also added on top of everything, and it's probably the best thing to happen to the song so far. Another very similar spacey sort of synthy melody is also added on top of it, which works well in tandem with the two melodies playing off each other quite nicely. They almost sound like one melody, they sort of mix together really well. And yep, both of them sound spacey and work together well. Then at around about 1.5 minutes, everything that has been laid up until this point just pretty much drops out of the song, except for the spacey melodies, which I liked from earlier. Trance songs seem to do this a lot. They layer heaps and heaps of stuff up and then drop 95% of it out at one point. I'm not sure if I like this style yet, but it is interesting. Then my favorite part of the song is layered over that spacey melody we've already talked about. It's a new melody, which for some reason always makes me think of The Mentalist by Mr. Fiji Ouija. I don't really know why it makes me think of that, because I listen to The Mentalist and I listen to this, and they don't really sound that similar, but it will just always make me think of that song, and I can't tell you why, but this melody is really awesome, and it has some really cool pitch and reverb effects. It's fast and uses some pretty interesting and original samples, and yeah, I just really like it, and for me, this melody is by far the best part of the song. This whole time, the background spacey melody is building and building in frequency in sort of that way that so many trance melodies do in trance songs. A fast beat is soon added, and there's also a little repeating melody, which is a couple of the notes cut out of that spacey melody from earlier. Both the beat and melody sort of build in that generic build-up way, the beat in speed and the melody in pitch, they sort of build in that generic build-up way, and it's fine. The build-up drops into a breakdown that is leading up to the main drop of the song, and this breakdown pretty much exclusively uses that short, bouncy, bassy melody that I mentioned earlier. This melody is pretty cool, and at times reminds me of the track Togi. There's a whole bunch of white noise in the backing, which I really don't like, but there are some glitchy things in the melody which turn it into a sort of a strange saw-sounding glitchy little sound for a few seconds, which is, it's pretty cool, and it kind of reminds me of a really, really tame version of some of the weirder sounds heard in something like Faint Echoes by Karma Fields. Then there's a really basic build-up which just increases some backing noise and adds a beat which speeds up. You know, it's generic, it's average, I've mentioned stuff like this 1,000 times. And then at a whopping 3 minutes and 22 seconds, the song finally drops. You know, these trance tracks really do like to take their time, which isn't the end of the world, but It builds a lot of climax for the drop and gives people high expectations of what that drop's going to be. And for me, that drop really doesn't live up to those expectations in this song. The way I see it, the drop is just a modified version of what we've already heard in the breakdown and build-ups. It still is heavily reliant on that melody that reminded me of Togi earlier. It overuses backing white noise to mask the lack of anything else happening, kind of. And there is a decently fast beat which keeps the song going, but still isn't amazing. The beat complexes by adding a clap over it. A generic trance snare is added, which is, you know, I'm never a fan of that type of beat. It's just the most sort of generic thing that a house or trance song can do, just adding that snare over it. It's just, I'm not a fan. But luckily, the melody complexes as well by adding some synth backing pads. But as a whole, I feel like this drop was just too little, too late. And the drop just didn't really do much. It was basically just a generic beat, repetitive bass type melody, which is okay at best, white noise which is overused, and a pad which is added later. It really isn't very much. The drop comes to a very instant stop when everything except the backing pad is removed. This pad sounds quite a bit like strings and choir, even though I know it's not. It still carries that nice sort of emotional dramatic sound that you'd associate with strings and choir. The melody that reminds me of The Mentalist comes back in as well to pretty much save the song at this point, and a fast kick clap beat is soon added alongside the faster spacey melodies that were present in the first section which accompanied the Mentalist type melody. In my opinion, these two Mentalist-y parts of the song are the best by far. They're the only parts that I really enjoy, and these two melodies, these spacey melodies and these Mentalist type melodies, they work together really nicely and they complement each other nicely, which is good. And then we get to the second drop, which is basically a copy and paste of the first drop at its most complex. And by that I mean it sort of picks up where the first drop left off and then just continues with that. The second drop really doesn't change that much. The drop just follows a structure of repeating what we've already heard from the first drop at its most complex, and just then sort of things start dropping out and parts of the song start dropping out until basically we have nothing left but white noise, which forms the ending of the song. And you know, it's a long trance type ending. If there's something that trance songs never really do well in my mind, it's endings, because they just always take really long and they remove everything really slowly, and I would rather an ending be over in 10 seconds than a minute and a half. Thankfully this song isn't as bad as things like Limitless, but it's still not perfect. The thing about the song is, besides the melody that does remind me of The Mentalist, there's really nothing in the song that I can get excited about or look forward to. 95% of the things in this song I just don't really care about that much. And as much as I have said on this song, and as many elements as I have talked about, the song to me still feels uneventful and boring. One thing I really don't like in these trance or house type songs is how much they use and over-rely on white noise for build-ups and backing and that kind of thing. It really feels uninspired and really boring and unoriginal as a sound, in my opinion. It feels like at times the white noise is just there in the background to cover up that there really isn't much else going on besides that beat and sometimes a melody or two. And really, when there's nothing to fill that space, it just seems like they jam in some white noise instead of, you know, making something original and interesting to put in that spot. To wrap up, I don't hate this song, but there are some good bits, like I've mentioned. But unlike Tanpopo, this song really has no surprises in it, and there's very little for me to look forward to and enjoy. I don't think it's a terrible song, but it certainly is a product of its time, and it's in a genre of trance that I really don't enjoy at all. I love it when trance tries to build an atmosphere with things like Halo and things like Tanpopo from the last episode. But this is much more on the club and festival side of the genre, which is really the side of it that I really don't like. And that goes for most electronic. When you get into the really dancey, ravey, club type electronic, I'm just not into that. Of course there's exceptions, but as a general statement, that's not my sort of thing. For all of these reasons I've listed, I'm going to be giving Belgium by Eminence and Alex Faraway a 3 out of 10. A rating that basically says, there are some good things, I enjoy parts of it, but nothing stands out as great, and almost all of it is pretty generic and almost kind of lazy in my opinion. I don't know if I was too harsh on this track, but if you are a hardcore trance fan, let me know what you make of this track in the comments, but I just can't see the appeal to it at all. Today's fourth track is Android by Obsidia. And so far, I've been pretty surprised by Obsidia. His last track, and the only track by him that I've reviewed so far, was Another World, which was one of early stage's highlights for me. This song, though, in my opinion, can't even touch Another World. The track starts with a repetitive synthy lead. It is nothing special, and it's on a very short loop, and it does get old fast. After a little while, a bassy kick is added, which makes the song quite a bit more interesting. It isn't long before a growly backing bass replaces the kicks. It's pretty cool, but it's very quiet and doesn't help enough to save 30 seconds of a repetitive melody. The way this song does the first build-up is kinda interesting. Instead of doing what 99.5% of build-ups do and just go up in speed and go off in pitch, this build-up actually dips in pitch, and the main lead sort of bends downwards. This is actually pretty cool, and something that I did not expect from the song and find quite unique, and is definitely one of the most unique elements of this song. But then the first drop comes, and the biggest flaws of the song become apparent. The drop is just some of the most standard 2011 dubstep that I've heard yet. The drop starts off with a highly repetitive segment that lasts around about 20 segments. It consists of pretty much 3 elements, one being the backing drums, which are slow and pretty standard for this kind of dubstep, 2 being an actually pretty cool backing bass line that quite nicely accompanies by far the biggest and final part of this drop, the main bass lead. This lead, I really dislike it. It's repetitive and it's on a short loop. The dubstep sound it uses is on a really harsh saw, which makes it kind of annoying to listen to. The main lead practically ruins this first part of the drop to me. This part is just way too simple and repetitive. The fact that I can easily explain everything that happens at any given moment in like 15 seconds really says a lot about the levels of simplicity that this drop unfortunately contains. The drop continues by going into another segment which admittedly is somewhat better. This second segment is far less repetitive and keeps the same beat but removes the awesome bassline backing melody from the first segment. The main lead melody is changed and is put on a gate to speed it up at times, and a small glitchy element is added through that onto the drop as well. The issue is that the main sound has the same issue as earlier. It's on a really harsh saw, and the best way I could describe it is like to imagine the ugliest sound that Windows XP would make, and then layer that sound on top of it 100 times at once. It's just not nice to listen to, and if I was in a bad mood, I might almost call this headache-inducing. After this goes on for around about 10 seconds, an additional synth melody is layered over all those gross dubstep sounds and does kinda make a significant improvement, but it's still not enough to save the segment from just being, kinda annoying. And then we get to the third and arguably best segment of the drop, the screechy part. I say this because, well, the main difference in this drop is that it has a screechy kind of bass which is thrown in from time to time. And to me, at least, this sound is quite a bit cooler and more original than most of the dubstep-like elements that the song has put forth so far. The drop then wraps up by basically repeating the second segment, which I just described earlier. And to be honest, I found this drop deeply underwhelming compared to his last track. It was almost all just annoying, repetitive, unoriginal dubstep that I'm happy stayed in 2011. We have all heard tracks like this before, and we all know how boring and standard they are, and so far this track is looking to be just like that. The midsection between Android's 2 drops is very similar to the track's intro with a few minor melody additions, and not much else changes. This part is fine, but it would have been better to not practically copy and paste the intro here. The build-up to the second drop is the same as the first. There is only one change, and that is exactly when you would expect the drop to start after the build-up is just finished. The drop doesn't start. There's actually a pause which lasts maybe a second or two, in which practically nothing happens. At first it made me question if the song had finished, but then the vocal chop that says Android comes back in, and you know that the drop is back for the second time. And here we have the second drop. It follows practically the same 4-segment formula as the first, with each segment being very similar to that in the first drop, with only minor changes. The first segment changes by occasionally adding little bits of the second and third segments onto itself. The second segment changes by lowering the pitch of the main sound, the main saw bass lead that you hear a lot, and making that lead quite a bit less glitchy. The third segment changes the most out of all of them by adding this occasional really cool loud sound. I don't quite know how to describe it besides it's just loud and cool and it sounds kinda alien. I think it's some sound played backwards, but I really don't know, to be honest. All that matters is that this little addition I do quite like, and it does make the segment that was already my favourite in the song quite a bit better. And then the fourth segment just repeats the second segment in the same way that it did earlier. The song wraps up by going into another synthy section which is identical to the intro. So in my mind, by far the biggest problem of this song is that pretty much everything I've just described are repeated multiple times. There isn't a single chord progression that just plays once. They all play 3, 4, 5 times, all of which to the point where you're sick of them before the song's even finished. And that isn't helped by the fact that both drops are similar and come quite close to mirroring each other. In short, this song is just repetitive and mostly unoriginal dubstep noises with some synthy melodies and a very occasional cool theme. And this is why I'm going to be giving Android by Obsidia a 3 out of 10. It's almost all bad in my mind, with very little merit. There are occasional things I like, which is what's saving the song from getting a 2, but 3 is the highest that I'm willing to give it. It is a pity that Obsidia didn't follow up Another World with an equally good track, but I know that he has some good stuff coming in the future too. So, for today's final song, we have the oh-so-well-known electro track, Top of the World by Stephen Walking. This is an interesting track for Stephen Walking, as it marks the start of him branching out from his typical dubstep style. Branching out being something that he is quite well known for nowadays. Along with Airwaves, this is Monstercat's first quote-unquote typical electro tracks, I'd say. And so far in this series, I've had quite mixed opinions on how to feel about Stephen Walking. While I quite like Light Pollution and Still Walking, I felt like Metropolis was a bit of wasted potential and missed the mark a little bit. I'm not 100% sure where Top of the World will fit in, so let's go find out. The track kicks off with that famous melody that we all know so well, the original Top of the World electro melody. I'm not sure if it's just me, but this melody feels important to Monstercat, in a similar fashion to that of Razor Sharp or Flight's melodies, in the way that it got Monstercat a lot of recognition and publicity early on. I might be wrong there, but back to the song. Yeah, I like this melody quite a lot. I don't love it, but it's nice. And so after about 15 seconds or so, a really basic electro kick style beat is added under the main melody. And it's fine, I guess, though it is a very standard and unoriginal beat, it does do its job. After another 15 or so seconds, a backing melody is added on top of everything else. It's really cool and it's quite hard to explain. It's pretty smooth and quite a constant sound that flows between different notes and chords, as well as constantly panning between the left and right hand sides of your speakers or headphones. The backing melody, yeah, I really like it. It's quite unique and I can't quite say I can remember anything quite like it. After yet another 15 seconds, there is a drum break and a low backing bass is added. It reminds me of a complextro or maybe dubstep bass. It's quite good and the track soon goes into a pretty generic build-up which features the iconic "Don't Look Down, We're on Top of the World Now" vocal chop. But besides that vocal chop, this build-up is pretty average in almost all ways. The beat increases in speed and the melody raises in pitch. It's the sort of stuff we've heard 1,000 times before. For the majority of the drop, there are only a few elements. The first being the generic electro beat, the second being the electro bass, which does actually at times sound somewhat similar to some of the basses in our last track, just that here they are commonly changing in pitch and sound and aren't nearly as predictable. And the third element present in this drop are lots of little electro-sounding notes and melodies and chord progression. These little things that come in and come out. They're nice and they're cool and they keep the song fresh and interesting and they don't repeat themselves that often. And they help to make what otherwise was maybe a kind of repetitive electro house style bass a lot more interesting. These three elements I think work together quite nicely. The bass and melodies are cool and complement each other quite well. The beat is pretty damn standard, but that is to be expected with this genre, so I can forgive it. But as a whole, this drop is pretty damn good. The song then takes a somewhat unexpected turn when the drop ends with basically everything in the song being stripped except for the electro bass. This bass is also muffled and dimmed down quite a bit for a few seconds. The bass bass and beats soon return at full volume, and a new synth-based melody is added. After a little while, the main melody of the song is reintroduced from the intro and layered over the other elements in an almost house-like manner. This section of the song is interesting. At first, because it still had prevalent use of the bass from the drop, I didn't realize that the drop had actually finished, and this shows that this section of the song, in my mind, does a great job of keeping the energy of the drops, while still being more melody focused and calming the song down a bit. This makes the song flow really nicely between drops, and changes in the song aren't as stark as they would be. He shows that he did put quite a bit of thought into making these mid-sections work. Where he could easily have just copy and pasted the intro like many other songs do, he decided to be a bit more original, and I really appreciate that. There is then another pretty generic build-up with the iconic On Top of the World Now vocal drop, and we find ourselves in the second drop. The first 15 or so seconds of the drop are, as far as I can tell, identical to the first in pretty much every way. But then, after 15 seconds, with pretty much no prompting, the song slows down a lot, and now it's dubstep. And for this dubstep segment, besides the BPM, not too much changes. The main bass and little melodic things that get thrown in slow down, as well as a couple new melodies and basses that get added to the song. As much as this dubstep part isn't amazing, and I don't feel like it improves the song in the way that it sounds that much, what it does is it adds variation, and that is far better than the song just repeating the same drop for the second time, and I'm really thankful that it didn't just do that. So yeah, I am really happy that this dubstep section is here, even if actually listening to it, I don't enjoy it that much. The drop ends and the outro starts, and this outro, it's nothing amazing, it's just the generic electro beat, the main Top of the World melody, and the weird, smooth backing melody that slides between different notes and chords from way back in the intro. This beat is removed, and the backing melody is removed, and then finally the main melody is removed, ending the song. So, it's not the most complex song, and it's not the best electro song, but it is a unique song, and that is something that I value very highly when reviewing and rating a song. This song takes some twists and turns I really didn't expect, and I find really, really cool. I feel like Stephen Walking was really trying something new here, and that's mainly why I like the song. This track is pretty much all good. The only downsides I can think of are that it does have pretty generic beats, and some of the main basses can get slightly repetitive, but neither of those two issues are massive, and that is why I'm going to be giving this song a 6 out of 10. It was very close to getting a 7, but 6 is where I'm happy to put it. So it's not a great track, but it's a damn good one, and it's certainly above average and unique in its own interesting way. And it's always interesting to see what Monstercat's longest running artist has up his sleeve. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. All future episodes of this series are going to be heavily structurally modified so that one episode can be released every 2 days instead of every 2 weeks like it seems to be now. Each episode will be reviewing 1 track instead of 5. For way more information on this, go check out my channel update that I uploaded just a few days ago. But as always, thanks heaps for watching. Let me know what you think of these songs down in the comments, and I will be seeing all you guys next week with my review of Stockholm by Hellberg.